My next guest joining us all the way from New Zealand is Dr. Richard Bolstad. Richard has such a long list of credentials and accomplishments and books that he's written. I just don't have time. So let's just bring him out, Dr. Richard Bolstad. You are listening to the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast, a show devoted to uncovering the systems and the secrets that set the best apart, where you learn how to take your coaching clients to the next level, while you grow the coaching practice of your dreams. So sit back and relax, or sit up and get excited. Either way, you might want to pay attention. This could be important. Richard Bolstad, it's so nice to meet you. Should I call you Dr. Richard Bolstad?
No, just Richard is good. Thank you, Doug. Good to meet you as well.
It's great. It's been long overdue. And you are a doctor. One of the things I very much admire about you is that you don't take any shortcuts and things. You have a long list of accomplishments, but you also among them got a PhD. Is that accurate as a PhD?
That's true from a recognized university and so
Whoa.
on. Yeah,
From
yeah,
a recognized university?
yeah,
I didn't know that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I did. I have kind of accumulated a few professions. So I trained first of all as a nurse, then um, and then trained as a teacher. As a certified teacher in New Zealand, and then as a psychotherapist, and kind of got hooked into NLP from that point, really. Yeah,
Uh, I do want to know how you made that transition because there are some people amongst psychotherapists who would
yeah,
say, "Oh, no, not that stuff."
yeah.
But so your doctorate is in what?
It's in clinical hypnotherapy. So it is. Um, that's again something that I wouldn't have studied by myself, and to that extent, and I think it shaped my future because in studying it at university, I kind of realized, okay, well, this is this is not the kind of magic way of thinking about it that we usually might have done in my NLP training. So I think what I learned from university studies was that to be skeptical, really, about, for example, about memory.
Mhm.
And so I went from having the idea that with hypnosis you could bring back people's memories somehow perfect, to realizing that there's no such thing as memory in that sense, and that hypnotherapy is at the best um, evoking experiences, and we still have to work out what's real and what's not real.
Yeah, for sure. We still have to work that out. I like how you put that. Just as an aside, I know this is about you, not about me, but I once was asked to do some hypnosis with a fellow named Michio Kaku, who is a
Yes.
mathematician. Oh, you know his work.
Excellent.
So there was a series done on, I think it's just called Science. I'm not sure of this series actually, but my job was to hypnotize him, which I did, and have him go back in his mind to childhood where he went into a school and saw the schoolroom and did various things there, and then they flew him out to California where he grew up, and they brought him to that school, and he actually said,
Wow.
yeah. So they said, how would you compare your hypnotic experience with this real experience? And as you say, there was a lot missing. The hypnotic experience was not the same, and he didn't remember everything exactly the way it was because that doesn't actually exist. Our brains are always recreating things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's and of course, not just in official hypnosis, but in the hypnosis of everyday life, because
Right.
we know that from the research about 9/11, that within a couple of years of 9/11, the people in New York have a very different record. There's kind of like 60% of the facts that they remember didn't actually feature in their first couple of days. So even with those kind of flashbulb memories, which are kind of vivid memories that people are convinced, well, this is really vivid. What we're actually seeing with vivid memories is the importance of it to the amygdala in the brain, and not actually the reality of it, you know.
Right. Which is something that you and I, we, again, you as an NLPer have crossed a threshold into also being open to the idea of the havening techniques, which some in the
Yeah.
NLP world embrace and some people in the NLP world are not yet embracing. So it has a lot to do with that and how the amygdala, encodes memories. So tell me, how did you get into havening?
Well, I was inspired by my wife Yulia, and she's a havening instructor. So, uh, so, uh, so that's where I really got in, and I was interested as well, of course, because uh, from my nursing background, I've been from the start attempting to kind of link what we're doing in NLP into neuroscience, and so one of the first things I looked at was how things like submodalities are actual places in the sensory cortex. And over the last 10 years, I suppose, as more and more research has kind of focused on the amygdala and the hippocampus in terms of memory storage and assessment, then I had started to look at that. And I think what havening does is it, again, kind of provides us with some nice links into the real stuff that's going on in the brain. And I'd been saying for some time, if we understand what's going on in the brain, we should not only be able to confirm NLP techniques, but we should be able to develop new techniques. And I really think that's what havening has done as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. So that's really nice and refreshing to know and to hear you say, and to know that you're on board with with us over here at the Haven Lab. And how did you get into NLP in the first place? If you're starting from psychotherapy.
Yeah, well, I had some friends who went to an NLP training, and they came back and said, "Oh, it's amazing. You just if you have an internal conflict, you put one part on one hand and one part on the other hand, they magically come together and everything's fixed." And I thought, this complete nonsense, just couldn't
Mm.
be true. Pretty much like what NLP people think about havening now, actually,
Right, yeah,
and
yeah,
sometimes apparently. So I had to study it to prove that it was wrong. That's a kind of an obsession of mine, is to sort of learn about what I'm critiquing, and unfortunately, the more I studied of NLP, the more it seemed to work. So then my next plan was actually to integrate it into my work as a psychotherapist. So I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll do NLP practitioner training, and that'll give me tools to use in my psychotherapy. And that lasted until the first person that very next week walked into my office with a phobia. And suddenly I realized I could fix this in half an hour, or I could see this guy once a week for the next half a year or something like that and make some money out of it. And I realized I couldn't live with myself anymore to do traditional psychotherapy and somehow incorporate this in. And so that was the end.
so is that completely true? I mean, you don't do psychotherapy at all?
Well, I don't do uh, what I would have called psychotherapy back then. No,
Okay.
no. In fact, I look at that now and I feel kind of sad that so many people in that field who are well intentioned spend so much time going in circles. And I think the other thing is that I learned to accept. And my wife Yulia has another interesting thing she says about this. She says, look, if you were going to refer someone in your family to a counselor for help, would you want them to spend the next 6 months exploring all the kind of hidden meanings of this in their childhood and so on, or would you just want them to get fixed? And most people, when they put it in personal terms, and I had psychotherapists come to me by then as an NLP practitioner say, I don't want psychotherapy. I just want you to fix this. I've got a sort of panic response that I have to this specific thing, and I don't want to know what was going on with my mum and my dad and all this sort of stuff. I just want to not have this panic response. And that idea of outcome focus, it was new to me as a psychotherapist, and it required a bit of humility, really accepting that not everyone wanted to play that whole game that I played in training as a psychotherapist.
Mhm. Mhm. It's interesting because, I have done both. I haven't
Yeah,
trained in psychotherapy. I've, taken classes and things. I was in some supervisions, but never pursued it as a degree thing. I'm a musician. My degree is in music, but I got a lot of benefit out of
yeah,
psychotherapy. I
yeah,
went to therapists for years, a Jungian psychologist, and it was
yeah,
fascinating stuff, and I benefited a great deal. And what I really particularly loved was that once I unearthed something in psychotherapy that I wouldn't have done, I don't think, in any sort of NLP or hypnosis sort of setting.
right.
When I unearthed something from there, then I could take it and do something with it using hypnosis, using NLP, that sort
Yeah,
of thing.
yeah, yeah. I think psychotherapy has. There are a number of things that happen in psychotherapy that are useful. They're not the same things that we kind of focus on most of all in NLP often. So one of them is that psychotherapy is a, a friendship. Like it's a relationship,
Mhm.
and um, and I'd like to think that the people I train in NLP create that kind of relationship as well, but I don't think that's always so. And I think Richard Bandler has fairly proudly said that his aim is not to have a relationship with the client. It's to get them to do stuff on their own, of course. And the second thing I think is really valuable is that um, it kind of provides some wider frames for like what's going on in your life, and so those things are really useful. That they're not necessarily what people think they're going to get when they first come into psychotherapy. Usually, they do have specific things they want to fix, and like anxiety, depression, something like that.
Sure.
So I definitely I learned some useful things for myself from that, and one of my interests has been to think how can we do that more succinctly as well. Like um, how can we create a good relationship with our clients rather than be technicians, and how can we also create um, help people to develop an understanding that goes beyond the specifics of I want to fix this thing or that thing. That's part of my interest, I must say, in NLP and spirituality as well. I think that's part of answering that kind of question.
Wow, very interesting. It sounds similar to what I was discussing the other day with Connie Ray Andreas, who
Oh
is,
yeah,
yeah,
carry on.
yes, I was just saying she's very much interested in that, and her wellness process
Yeah,
these days is all heading in that direction. Um, and I'd be happy to talk to you more about that, but I do want to just go back a little bit to what we were just talking about, and um, the idea that not only is there a relationship in therapy where there's, actually friendship, relationship sort of thing
yeah,
that takes place, but it's not just focused on one and done, kind of thing.
yeah,
One of the things
yeah,
I talk about with Milton Erickson is he was a psychiatrist. He would see people for week after week for years.
yeah,
There was never the pressure of I'm going to fix you now and then you're going to
yeah,
go home and be fine. It was never
yeah,
like that. I mean, he
yeah,
do that, but it was never like that. It was never the point to the thing. So
yeah. And
when you do it, how does it work for you? Are you go ahead?
yeah, well, I think there's a place for both those things. And as I say, if someone comes in and they just want a phobia fix, then I think they have a right to ask for that. And when people come in, it's like when someone does NLP training with me, they want the whole package. They want to understand the background of it all as well. And I think that's true for some clients as well. And um, I would call it coaching now because we're focused on uh, their ability to do things rather than on the problems. But I think making some kind of arrangement that is a coaching package, so that they can explore that in an ongoing way. I think that's important. The other thing that Milton Erickson did as part of that long-term process was that he is really coaching. He would he was strategic. He would give people things to do, of course, and a lot of the stories we hear about him is not actually what he did in a session, but what happened as a result of him giving people something to do in their life, and then checking the next week, did they really do it, and what happened. And that, I think coaching has brought that back into NLP. The fact that in coaching and business, people expect that they will do things in the real world and then discuss those in therapy or in coaching. I think that's been valuable to us all.
Yeah, fantastic. So tell me now about spirituality. How does that fit in?
Okay, uh, well, I'm friends with Connie Ray, and maybe I wouldn't state things quite as strongly as she does, where she says, this is the only question that needs answering. Though I have been known to say that. I think that spirituality is it's not a separate thing. It's fundamental to being human, and so our ability to use NLP as we explore it, I think provides a new path for people who are interested in deepening their sense of being human, deepening their connection to everything that is. So Yulia and I actually run a 7-day training, which is NLP and spirituality, and that includes some traditional Chinese exercise training, which we're instructors of, and meditation kind of incorporated into that with an NLP presuppositional background. So we're sort of approaching it from an NLP attitude. I think probably doing quite a lot of things that people don't usually do on NLP training. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's. I think that's really a lot of what people seek, as you're saying, when they go for psychotherapy, is to understand life more fundamentally and to find happiness. And I think that doesn't sound much like spirituality at first, but I think that really has been what spirituality has been about all this time. It's kind of like we can achieve all sorts of things, but the only thing that really matters is something that can't be achieved, because you can't steal happiness. You can't hold it. It's when you're actually delighting in what is that it is there. Yeah.
So you can't achieve happiness because it's not a thing. It's
That's
a
it.
process.
That's it. Yeah.
Wow. Right. So I'm also curious about you because you often are more aware and astutely conversant in American politics than I am. So I'm curious about it. What do you do? What are you sticking your nose in our business for?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I guess I've been sticking my nose this year, especially in Russia's business as well. And
That's good.
I have a family. I have a grandson who has two other cultural backgrounds. So he is both New Zealander and Japanese, and he has grown up in French milieu. So he actually is trilingual, and he's at university now. But I really have a sense of this is all of our future.
Did you say, sorry. You have a grandchild who's at university now?
Yeah.
How old are you?
Well, I'm in my late 60s, yeah. So my I sort of feel like all of us collectively we're trying to work out how to survive as humanity right now, and I think America is clearly pivotal in that and endeavor for humanity to survive, and Russia is this year as well, and so yeah, I can't see it. I've written about, and I teach actually a course on NLP in activism. So I do that with ecology groups and with peace groups here in New Zealand and overseas. And so one of my interests is to get people more involved in creating a planet that will survive and and caring for life in general. I think that's a larger part of what I want to do on the planet.
That's so cool. So you basically you get interested in something, you study it, and then you teach a course in it.
It's exactly right. Yeah. So I'm just completing a degree at present in archaeology, and so that's another thing that I figure as a psychotherapist I was always digging up the past, so I might as well
Huh?
do it honestly instead of just figuratively. So I think as well that that's part of my interest in the big picture, the big story of humanity, and I think uh, it's it's always something people believe that they're at a crossroads in history. I think it's possible that the survival of this planet depends on what we're doing right now, and that NLP has something important to contribute to that in terms of understanding how people change, how we influence each other, um, and having a systems view of what's happening in the world.
A systems view.
Yeah, so that what we do is connected to everything else. So that rather than thinking that we can help people achieve something just by themselves, and that's all we need to do, to realize that actually we can only achieve things if the planet survives. And part of that is to the research from psychology that people like Richard Weissman, who I know has criticized NLP, but I do love his research as well. He's a mainstream psychology researcher, and he points out that when people achieve goals, the small thing, the very small part of NLP that really is what business people often think of it as NLP, when people achieve goals, they almost always, when they're highly successful, they have some sense of how this relates to the larger picture. So he calls it the Apollo effect. And he says what an enormous thing America, for example, managed to achieve with the first moon landings, because they thought they were doing it for all humanity, because the people involved thought they were doing it for humanity. And I'm interested in how to harness and um, generate that kind of energy. Yeah.
So you just went from the microcosm to the macrocosm really quickly there. Um, so when they achieve a small thing, if it has that Apollo effect, like I'm doing, it might be small, but I'm doing it for humanity,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
it gives me that.
Yeah. And I think that's fundamental to how Milton Erickson did things as well. He, for himself and for his clients, he would never be sort of thinking how can you have a goal that you achieve, so much as how can you have a sense that you are important in the world.
Mm.
And stories like the African Violet Queen, I think they kind of epitomize that attitude of taking an everyday human being and showing them that they're not just everyday, they can be something extraordinary. And his own life absolutely epitomizes that. Yeah.
Ah, by the way, are you wearing a purple shirt? Is that just my?
No, that's. I think that's to assume it's kind of more blue, I'd say.
That's true. Would you just tell the African violet story real quickly?
Sure, that's
I'm assuming that
Milton.
there's one or two visitors to our.
Yeah, may not have heard that. So Milton Erickson, as a medical doctor, he had a friend, also a medical doctor, who asked him if he would visit his elderly mother, who was living in Milwaukee, and he was worried that she was getting depressed, and she was living by herself. So Milton went in, and as happened in those days, she invited him in for a cup of tea and so on, and she he asked her to show him around the house, and what he saw was that the house was kind of set in time. Things were getting dusty, and the curtains were pulled across the windows and so on, and it looked like a place where someone would be depressed. And in fact, there was only one room where there was light, and that was a sunroom where there was a little African violet growing. And when he talked with her about her contact with other people, which Milton was always aware of, not just the internal part of depression, but what happens in your relationships. And she explained that she used to go to church, but she didn't now. She kept up reading the newsletter, and so she knew who'd been born and died and so on. But that was really all. but her Christianity was important to her. So he utilized all those things together, and he recommended to her, well, nowadays people don't get much celebration of life events like births and weddings and so on. And wouldn't it be lovely if you took cuttings off that African violet, for example, and you took along a cutting to each family who had some significant event like that as a kind of a symbolic gift. And so Milton used to keep the newspaper cutting from 20 years later when this elderly woman passed on. And the front page of the Milwaukee newspaper said, African Violet Queen dies, and thousands attend her funeral. And it's a very, very inspiring story of how to deal with, well, depression, we would say, from a traditional point of view, but how to help one human being who had no context almost to use what little context she had to do something extraordinary.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful story and very illustrative of Erickson's non-hypnotic work.
Yeah.
A lot of people who think of Milton Erickson think, oh, yeah, he was a great hypnotist. But
Yeah.
a lot of his work had no hypnosis per se
Yeah.
involved.
That's
Yeah.
Jeff Zeig, I remember Jeff saying to me one time that he felt sad that people knew so much about Milton Erickson as a therapist and so little about him as a human being, and that it was as a human being that he most of all excelled.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think in that story, would you really say he was working as a psychiatrist, or was he, he was one human being to another human being. He wasn't even hired to treat this woman in some way. He was simply being a human being who knew how to inspire someone else.
That's beautiful. Cool. So let me ask you about this. The reason we're together, the reason I finally get to talk to you is because of a horrible thing that has happened. It's like, okay, silver lining. But a horrible thing happened. Jerry Seavey fell down a flight of stairs and had a terrible response to this and brain bleeding for hours because he wasn't
Yeah.
given proper treatment. He's an old man. You just sit him up in the waiting room. He'll be fine. Um,
Yeah.
so he got a lot of brain challenges, let's just say. And then, of course, Mary Lou, his wife, um, really kind of saved him. She called the doctor and said, get him a CT scan now, and made it
Yeah.
happen, made him get treatment. But that treatment only went so far. And all the now extensive work that he's going to have to be doing for the next year or so to get back to a semblance of what he was is all being paid for out of pocket by
Yeah.
Mary Lucy. So we're doing this in an effort to raise some money for them so people will go to the GoFundMe site and donate, hopefully, lots and lots of money to them so she can, have a little breathing space. And I'm just curious for you, why are you here? Do you know them? I mean, you're from New Zealand. I mean, what
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
sticking your nose in our business again one more time?
Yeah, that's right. Well, firstly, um, I think that is a really good thing for us to do in the NLP community, and lots of my progress in the NLP community has been because someone did something like that for me. Like how I met Stephen Connery and Andreas was I was going to a training near where they live. It was a training in Denver, and I contacted them, and Steve said, "Well, we're sort of brothers because we're NLP trainers, so come over and stay with us." And um, then he connected me up with all sorts of people around the world as well, and that was really significant in my career. And so I think that's essential to creating this kind of therapeutic and supportive environment for the world that's central to what NLP is about. And I also do find it kind of shocking from a New Zealand point of view to look at what healthcare is like in the wealthiest country in the world, in America. And from over here, gee, that's heartbreaking. I mean, not just what happened to this individual, but to see so many people in a country with such enormous wealth and um, it being entirely up to them. Because I know that had that happened to me, and of course I hope not, but had it happened to me, all of that's covered by the community that I live in. And I know that's true through most of the world. That's a real tragedy.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling, honestly.
Yeah.
And it's great that we can do this, and we shouldn't have to. Should be covered. Absolutely. Um, and I'm really grateful for you to be doing this for them, for us. It's lovely for you to step in, and it's great for me to meet you and talk to you. Um, when it comes to community, you said NLP is about community. NLP is about making the world a better place. I don't think that's true for a lot of people. People think of it as, I mean, if you look at Wikipedia, NLP
Yeah.
is like pseudoscience, and it gets all this bad press, and there's about manipulation and sales, and for a lot of people NLP is about seduction or any number of weird uses for it. um, how do you see this world community?
Yeah, so I understand that too. That part of the attraction to many people who get involved in NLP, and I'm an NLP trainer, so I come across people who come into my trainings for all sorts of reasons. Part of the attraction is that, and also um, the history of NLP has quite a lot of examples of core developers of NLP who are kind of fighting for um, their place in history personally, and so that doesn't look good from outside either. The sort of war between Bandler and Grinder, or between Frank Pucelik and other people in the community for who started it, and who's the most important, and so on. So there is that, and we happen to have, with NLP, I believe, stumbled upon a lot of really, really useful things that gradually neuroscience is revealing the base of. And those things have a momentum of their own. I think that people like Robert Dilts have understood this from the start, that NLP can be about making the world a better place. And so my own interest is to sort of find people like that around the world who are really who are really interested in using this as a new way of doing something precious for humanity. And one of the things I'm really aware of, when you ask about my age, is, and perhaps this is this historical perspective as well, but we only have a certain amount of time here. There's no point in building an empire for ourselves individually. We're only here for one lifetime, and at a time, and so whatever. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
so I really think what makes it most exciting is to be part of something larger. One of the things that happened with Milton Erickson that people often forget is that during his lifetime, he was much less well known than, of course, he has been since his death. And that was not accidental. He planned for the momentum to continue and build after his death. So he essentially selflessly planned how would things happen after his death, who would be in charge of the Milton Erickson Foundation, who would promote his work, and he looked for people who would do that ethically, and who would be able to make a difference in the psychotherapy community. So he often talked to people about what will happen in 30 years' time, what will happen when I'm gone, and things like that. And I admire that, and I think there's that trend through the development of NLP as well.
Wow, it's really interesting. It's interesting. I remember, I don't know if this is true, but I heard a story by one of my teachers, Dave Dobson. he said that Milton Erickson said about Bandler and Gundry. He said, those boys, they think they got me in a nutshell. He said,
Yeah,
well, they may have the shell, but they ain't got the nut.
yeah. that's I mean that's so true. In the sense that Milton Erickson was so much more than the language patterns that were modeled from him, or um, any of those things. In NLP, it's become traditional to say, well, NLP was developed by modeling Satir and Pearls and Erickson. Of course, if that was true, then somewhere we would have people's modeling of their values and their meta programs and their sense of purpose in life, their sense of mission. And we don't have that really very clearly in the early work anyway. And I think for Milton Erickson, that the nut was very important. I've heard that description before, I think, and so I think that none of what Milton Erickson achieved would have been possible if he only had the Milton model, for example, or something like that. Yeah,
Now, for me, it's my analogy is music. I can get a piece of music and I can play the notes the way that it's written on the page, or listening to it the way somebody else played it. But it's not like music yet. It's just
yeah,
notes, and
yeah,
it's like it's coming from the inside. What's the
yeah,
saying? What's the message? What's the emotion behind it that gets communicated? That is what's really actually important,
yeah,
and the music is just a vehicle for. So
yeah,
the tools, the skills, the meta model, the Milton model, those just tools.
yeah.
How do you use them? Who's the guy behind the plow or whatever?
Absolutely. Yeah, so that's kind of like linking back into this idea of what is there from psychotherapy that we can take out and make useful, and it being more than just you can achieve this one thing by doing this one process kind of thing.
So let me ask you a question. If somebody does, you talked before about somebody comes in and says, I just want to
Yeah,
fix this phobia, and you say, okay, well, let's fix the phobia. Thank you for coming in. Please,
yeah.
like me on Facebook or whatever. Um, what if a part of you thinks that's like, well, this person, you know, yeah, they need to fix that phobia, but there's more going on here that they need a little spirituality, something.
Look, I always think that, but then,
So,
but then part of part of part of spirituality for me is this sense of spiritual autonomy. It's this sense that it's really they actually have to choose that for it to mean anything, and so, yeah, I mean that's really true, and I think that um, the way that I am as a human being in that interaction as I help them do what they want to do should
right.
in itself speak of spirituality, should in itself um, be evidence. I really think that's true, that for example, when I'm running an NLP practitioner training, I just run an NLP practitioner training. But I think that people actually come to those trainings and they enjoy those trainings because they meet me as a human being.
Mhm.
And so I don't try and do a whole lot of other things on that training or trick them into carrying on and doing endless things with me.
You don't
Um,
trick them into carrying on and doing endless things with you? What kind of
no,
man are you? I thought you said you're an NLP trainer. What is the matter?
and I explain that to them as well. That often they come to the training and they're thinking, like, how can I get my family to understand this? How can I get my friends to understand this? And I tell them, like, from my experience, it's what you are as a human being, what you are as a model,
Mhm.
is is the most persuasive thing that you have, and that hassling the people that you live with, you should join NLP as well, or something. That is not going to happen. That's not going to work. That's really true. Like, people who come to my training as a result of someone else, they tend to say, look, I knew this person before he came to your training, and I knew him after he was at your training, and NLP really changed him.
Hmm.
And that was true for me as well. I remember when one of my son's friends uh, was around at our place one time, and he said, you're a nicer guy since you've been doing this NLP stuff. You should keep doing that. And that was, that you couldn't get better feedback than that. That's just from a teenage friend of my son. So
So interesting. Wow. I wish that were true for no matter who was teaching NLP, because I don't know if that's always the case. That it just, NLP itself is going to make you a better person. That's just like, those tools, you can use them in lots of different ways.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, just saying. So, yes, tell me a little bit about your life outside of NLP. Do you like stories telling? Do you like jokes? Do you do stand-up comedy? Are you a painter? Do you
Well, I think probably the most non NLP. It's very hard to find something that's outside of NLP. The most non NLP thing that I'm really involved in probably is archaeology. Uh, so we have a second sort of home essentially on Cyprus, and that is a place where I've done the practical part of my archaeology degree,
uh-huh.
and I love that. It's got no immediate benefit, and that's something enjoyable about it. And yet it's linked in, for me. It's linked in the background to reminding me all the time we are part of a big story, and human beings have been on this planet for a long, long time. We've been trying to do the same things, like create a life that is enjoyable and um, that brings us together as a community, all those sorts of things. We've been trying to do that for a long, long time. And
Right.
I'm very interested in learning other ways, like looking at Cyprus, for example. Cyprus was the center of the goddess religion of the cult of Aphrodite. And um, so uh, that provides an interesting frame because it reminds us that we haven't always thought of spirituality as being a guy's thing either. This is just a particular time in history when we think of things this way, and we may be able to learn some things from other ways of thinking that people have had at other times in history.
Or history, as it.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, well, so that's, but why get a degree? You're late 60s. Why work for a degree in archaeology?
Well, what I found with the training in hypnotherapy, you see, was that um, the expertise that those people have in the university system, for all I might critique it or something, that expertise is really, it provides something from outside. And otherwise, I would go into my narrow little worldview, and I would be fascinated by things probably that were fascinating rather than real.
Right.
So, one of the things that the pandemic really made very clear for me was the importance of actually reality testing our ideas, and so I really went back after that over my own um, history and looked at the extent to which I had also been caught up in conspiracy theories over time. So,
Hmm.
I attempted to reframe NLP as being, in a sense, about cognitive clarity, about utilizing the biases that we have and also learning about them, just like the Milton model, meta model kind of thing, dichotomy. So, utilizing the biases like Milton Erickson would do, and also unpacking those biases like Virginia Satir would do. And I really think that that's part of our mission as NLP practitioners as well, and that we have kind of failed that. John Grinder said early on in NLP that he thought of NLP as a bullshit detection system.
Hmm.
And I think it's mostly been a bullshit generating system. And the pandemic reminded me, like, if we just go on generating bullshit and saying any idea is as good as any other, and, since the map's not the territory, who cares what map we have, then actually the world could sink. so, so we actually do need to work out how does this pan out in reality for us and for other people. So yeah, so that's been one of my passions, is unpacking for myself what parts of my belief system, even in the NLP, were just conspiracy theory nonsense.
Wow. So if NLP is not that bullshit detector, then what is? How do you make that determination?
Well, I think that neuroscience is kind of helping it. Let me give you a concrete little example. So, um, on Mars, there's a kind of a mountain on the planet Mars that, in an early photo, I'm sure you've seen this photo. An early photo looks like a human
Oh
face
yeah, yeah,
looking
yeah,
up.
yeah.
Totally fascinated me at the time. I bought a book on it even. Like it just, wow, look at that, and pyramids nearby maybe, and you know, and this is as silly as the idea that there are canals on Mars. I mean, it's just the reason why it happens is because our brain is preset to look for faces.
Sure.
And thank goodness we don't want to stop that. I mean, that's how come babies find their mum in all the chaos around them, and they orient always towards faces. So we are looking for faces everywhere. Uh, but we shouldn't be fooled into thinking that somehow this is reality. This is just a waste of time. And I think, metaphorically, that's what's happening. We look for hidden patterns because it's good to look for hidden patterns, but we need to know that our brain is constantly inventing patterns, and most of them are just nonsense.
Right.
So, uh, so I think in the pandemic, people managed to invent all sorts of interesting theories about what people like me as a nurse were doing around the world. And it's actually quite dangerous, the idea that there's this sort of secret plot by doctors and nurses to fake COVID numbers and there really is no COVID and all this sort of thing. But with a little bit of humility, I come to realize that I too have always um, been susceptible to those things because that's what it is to be human. We have all sorts of biases built in.
Yeah, very cool. Nice. Good to know. Yeah, I'm aware of that. I've seen um, Jesus's face on a slice of toast, and that's
Yeah.
very. I worshipped it for a while, but then I got hungry, so I ate it. But yeah, it's important to keep the practical. I mean, it's toast, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah. No, but it's really true. We do look for patterns. That's why we see, you know, constellations in the stars, and we see
Yeah.
these things, and we
Yeah.
see we look for patterns, and if you look for it hard enough, you'll find it.
Yeah.
It's really really good to know, and I'm again very happy to hear you be saying that. That's good to know. Still, why the degree? Why do you need a degree in archaeology?
I don't need it, I guess. Um, it it does help me get other people's opinions about it though, and keep me away from what I call pseudo archaeology. So from I'm hesitant to, like I'm sure that there's just a Netflix series just been put out with a whole lot of archaeological claims that don't look to me, from my learning, to be very convincingly archaeological at all. And so again, it's immensely popular, but I don't think it's long-term helpful. So yes, I liked the idea of getting that. Kind of professional input into what I was doing as well.
Okay.
And I also like hacking into that community. So I do research as part of this last part of my degree, and actually, I know it sounds trivial, but it's an opportunity to contribute to that field as well. To
Cool.
so my interest is in combining these two things. Of course, so I'm wanting to do research on what was going on in the minds of the people in these ancient rituals in Cyprus. So in these ancient goddess rituals,
Mhm.
what kind of psychoactive substances were they using, and how does that relate to what we're trying to do in NLP and hypnosis nowadays? Yeah.
Fascinating. No, it's really truly fascinating stuff. It's just, a few years ago, I was looking at pursuing a degree, a PhD in and what do they call it, depth psychology, mostly Jungian
Yeah.
psychology. And I
Yeah.
found a place that had this really fascinating program that I thought would be perfect. And so when I went to sign up for it, they said it's $125,000. I thought, well, that's not too
Yeah.
bad. And then I said, no. It's
First,
125,000 a term, yeah. And I thought, oh,
yeah,
crap.
yeah, yeah. I mean that is true, and that was an issue for me as well. I mean, I'm doing my degree with Leicester University in Britain, and because they have exactly what I wanted, in terms of places like Cyprus. But that was a decision to spend a lot of money on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, for me, I was like, I just,
Yeah,
I can read the books, I
over
can
the top.
do the research, but I don't need to spend that.
I got it.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's unfortunate that when I graduated college, the five-year 4-year degree, I had virtually no student debt whatsoever. Um, it was amazing.
Yeah,
Nowadays, kids are like really strapped, and at least again, maybe that's America, but it's certainly
yeah,
true here.
yeah,
That
yeah,
boy,
yeah. Well, I mean, my grandson pays some money, but yeah, it's not comparable to the American situation. Yeah.
hmm, amazing. Well, okay, I'm gonna let you go. Thank you for this time. Hey, just real quick, if you had anything to say to people who are thinking about contributing to the GoFundMe site for Mary Lou and Jerry Seavey, what might you say?
I would say that it's not just to help one individual, but to help us as a community as well. I mean, I think that's it's a really inspiring thing that you're doing, not just person to person, but as part of this bigger community of NLP, and that's very precious. And if we don't look after ourselves, then we're not being the model that we want to be for the world. So
Yeah, beautiful. And I was thinking about before when you said the bullshit detector and the real stuff. What's real? This is real. These guys
yeah,
are.
yeah,
He had a brain bleed, and
yeah,
will his brain come back? It's like maybe not to quite the way that it was, because some of it is
yeah,
just basically died. The parts of his brain are not
yeah,
there, functional anymore. So it's amazing how plastic the brain can be and find different neural pathways to do certain things. But it's a long road he's got ahead of
yeah.
him, and
We
so,
live in the real world. That's right.
we can, as much as we can help out, I think it would be humanly nice to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for organizing this. Yeah.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for being here and contributing, and I hope to talk to you again. I'd like you to be on my podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. That's
Is that a
great.
yes?
That sounds, yeah, that sounds good. That sounds
Okay, good.
interesting.
Okay. Thank you, Richard. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
This has been the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure seeing you again. Hope to see you again real soon. Come back next week when we have another gripping and exciting episode of the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. And if you want to, you can find out more about us, each and every one of us, at essentialcoachingskills.com. Thanks.